Hey there. So we are going to now be moving into Strike Them Hard, The Baker Massacre by Ramona Bighead. It is a play, so we're going to be reading a play. We'll have different parts. We'll read this out loud as a class. I mean, individuals have their parts, and we'll read it that way. We're not going to act it, though. Today is just to introduce what this is. Question number one is that have you ever heard of the Baker Massacre? It's also known as the Bryce River Massacre. The answer most likely for many of you is no. No, I have not. And for us, especially in Montana, that is sad. You're going to find out why it's super sad, because this does take place here. It is a true story about a Blackfeet band of Began Indians that were slaughtered, massacred. So, how's this fit in? We've recently been looking at the Civil War. So, let me connect the Civil War to this piece first, because that is the introduction, seeing the connection here. So, end of Civil War, 1865. The end of the Civil War, North and South, crumbles. You start the Reconstruction era, so actually literally reconstructing part of the South, because it was burned, destroyed, plantations burned, the infrastructure crumbled, and also the economy, because the economy of slavery was gone. Slavery is abolished, and therefore you had to pay your laborers, which then, if you're a cotton farmer, raises the price of cotton because you can't afford to sell it at that lower price and pay your workers. And so that completely changes things. If you were a small farmer, and just had maybe a couple slaves or something, it might not be worth it to even be a farmer for you anymore. So you might want to just give up and try something completely new, which is incredibly frustrating and terrible. Also, 600,000 dead soldiers. That affected a lot of families. And so for some of those, it might have been just too hard to keep on going that they did the way they did before the war. Some of them wanted something new, something different, something completely different. They wanted to get away from it all. At the same time, during the Civil War, we had on the northern end, we had southern too, but massive buildup of our army infrastructure. Huge amount of lieutenants and generals and infantrymen, and training of our soldiers. So at the end of the war, we had a very large surplus of warriors, and especially in the higher ranks. The only way at that particular moment in time to really get any better at your job and to increase your rank was in war itself. But the war is over, so there are no wars to fight. So how are you going to increase yourself? You need a war. Okay, that gets us into today's thing. People left the East for the West. They're also reading in the papers, like 10 years back, about the gold rush in California. Well, in 1864, the year prior to, late 1864, October 30th, 1864, they also heard about this crazy gold find in Montana, Helena here. That's when the Four Georgians discovered gold. October, again, they didn't start mining in the winter because it's cold. So they waited till spring, came back in the spring. Of course, they told people about it, so tons of people came in here in the spring. And also, the war had just ended, and they've heard about gold in Montana, so they're all coming out here looking for their riches. That's one of the pieces, this westward expansion. And so you get this massive influx of people from the east. Again, they're also promised a bunch of free land as well for homesteading. So if you couldn't make it as a miner, then maybe you could just homestead and farm and create your new life. Again, there's already people here. Many different Native American tribes. And so there were conflicts between the settlers coming in and the natives who already were here. And, in all honesty, my opinion is probably most of those conflicts could have been solved if there wasn't the big language barrier. The Native Americans were scared of these white settlers. The white settlers were scared of the Native Americans. They both thought on both sides that the other one was going to kill them. And so there's that fear. And then if there was any sort of tiny little social thing that happened between them, yeah, it escalated very, very quickly and became ugly. And then, of course, those stories spread around and, yeah, it turned into worse stories. So the United States on the eastern heard about these skirmishes, small skirmishes between settlers and natives. And they had this surplus of soldiers. So they sent the soldiers west to fight the Indians to protect the settlers' interests. And so then you get all these forts, you know, Fort Benton, Fort Shaw, Fort Harrison, well, yeah, Fort Harrison, were all built for protection against the Indians in the area. Now, this is also the time when they called it the Indian Wars. I say wars because in the end, if you have the vision of history looking backwards, not so much a war, more of battles. Some were battles. Most were probably more considered massacres. And we say this because, or I say this because it was really repeating rifles, revolvers, some Gatling guns, highly trained soldiers versus, for the most part, bows and arrows, maybe a couple of rifles. And who's going to win? Of course, the people with the big guns. They win. It's not really a war so much as it's just a destruction. And also you get out here, and if you're just trying to increase your personal glory, like such as Custer, for example, you then, if you hear of problems in an area, even if they're unsubstantiated problems, you go in with a heavy hand, fight, and win a battle, and therefore you increase your rank. If it wasn't totally legit, you're the only one that saw it. You and your soldiers. So all you have to do is kind of write a fake report or exaggerate the truth on a report, and no one would know the difference until, of course, 100 years later, when we can actually go back and look and talk to people and figure out that that's probably what happened. Anyway, getting back to this, just as an introduction. So this is 1870. Most of it takes place right around Helena or north of here where the massacre site happened, which is on the Marias River near Shelby, Montana. Baker, Lieutenant Baker, was going to attack one group of the Blackfeet because of something they did, which you'll learn about when we read this. And he missed them. He found a different camp. He said, doesn't matter. They attacked that camp, which was suffering from smallpox. It was mostly women and children and old people. There's a few warriors, not very many. And they killed them all. 217 dead, massacred. And of course, it was an incredible mistake on Baker's behalf. He kind of suffered for it. People did try to cover it up, and try to make it not that big a deal and change the truth around it, but in the end, the Army downplayed it so much and continually tried to not mention it that eventually through history, if you try not to talk about it, it gets forgotten. On the Blackfeet side, many of their family members were murdered by the Army. At that point, after that, they didn't fight back a whole lot against the United States government. Also, they didn't talk about it because they thought, and you hear this from survivors, family survivors, they're like, well, we talk whispers in our families, but no one talked about it outside the family. You didn't talk about it for fear of retribution from the United States government again. Like, maybe not they're going to come in and kill you, but you don't know what they're going to do to you, and you just don't want to talk about it. So for 100 years or more, nobody talked about this. And then the historians going back to find out that this really did happen. Like, it was very real. And so the site of the location of the massacre, we're not exactly sure, fairly sure. There's a little bit of dispute, but There is no place you can actually go visit, though. There is no visitor center. This is not like Sand Creek in Colorado, where there's a giant visitor center for the massacre that happened there. This is not Wounded Knee, where the massacre occurred there, and there's a visitor center that you can learn about these things. This doesn't exist. But we do have the story. We're going to learn about the back history, about what led up to it. It's not clear cut. There are bad guys, both the white people side and the Native American side. There are good guys on the white people side and the Native American side. And really, we're just going to see the story, and we want to make sure this isn't forgotten, that this becomes something that we at least know about. And that is all. All right, we're going to starting reading tomorrow. Have a great day.